The Battle of Trafalgar was a naval engagement fought by the Royal Navy against the combined fleets of the French and Spanish navies during the War of the Third Coalition of the Napoleonic Wars. The battle was the most decisive naval victory of the war. 27 British ships of the line led by Admiral Lord Nelson aboard HMS Victory defeated 33 French and Spanish ships of the line under French Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve in the Atlantic off the southwest coast of Spain, just west of Cape Trafalgar, in Canos de Meca. The Franco-Spanish fleet lost 22 ships, without a single British vessel being lost. The British victory spectacularly confirmed the naval supremacy that Britain had established during the 18th century and was achieved in part through Nelson's departure from the prevailing naval tactical orthodoxy. This involved engaging an enemy fleet in a single line of battle parallel to the enemy to facilitate signaling in battle and disengagement, and to maximize fields of fire and target areas. Nelson instead divided his smaller force into two columns directed perpendicularly against the enemy fleet, with decisive results. Nelson was shot by a French musketeer during the battle and died shortly after, becoming one of Britain's greatest war heroes. Admiral Villeneuve was captured along with his ship Bucentaure. Spanish Admiral Federico Gravina escaped with the remnant of the fleet and succumbed months later to wounds sustained during the battle. Villeneuve attended Nelson's funeral while a captive on parole in Britain. Origins. In 1805, the First French Empire, under Napoleon Bonaparte, was the dominant military land power on the European continent, while the Royal Navy controlled the seas. During the course of the war, the British imposed a naval blockade on France, which affected trade and kept the French from fully mobilizing their own naval resources. Despite several successful evasions of the blockade by the French Navy, it failed to inflict a major defeat upon the British, who were able to attack French interests at home and abroad with relative ease. When the Third Coalition declared war on France, after the short-lived Peace of Amiens, Napoleon was determined to invade Britain. To do so, he needed to ensure that the Royal Navy would be unable to disrupt the invasion flotilla, which would require control of the English Channel. The main French fleets were at Brest in Brittany and at Toulon on the Mediterranean coast. Other ports on the French Atlantic coast harbored smaller squadrons. France and Spain were allied, so the Spanish fleet based in Cadiz and Ferrol was also available. The British possessed an experienced and well-trained corps of naval officers. By contrast, most of the best officers in the French Navy had either been executed or dismissed from the service during the early part of the French Revolution. As a result, Vice Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve was the most competent senior officer available to command Napoleon's Mediterranean fleet. However, Villeneuve had shown a distinct lack of enthusiasm for facing Nelson and the Royal Navy after the French defeat at the Battle of the Nile in 1798. Napoleon's naval plan in 1805 was for the French and Spanish fleets in the Mediterranean and Cadiz to break through the blockade and join forces in the Caribbean. They would then return, assist the fleet in Brest to emerge from the blockade, and together clear the English Channel of Royal Navy ships, ensuring a safe passage for the invasion barges. The Caribbean. Early in 1805, Vice Admiral Lord Nelson commanded the British fleet blockading Toulon. Unlike William Cornwallis, who maintained a tight grip off Brest with the Channel Fleet, Nelson adopted a loose blockade in the hope of luring the French out for a major battle. However, Villeneuve's fleet successfully evaded Nelson's when the British were blown off station by storms. While Nelson was searching the Mediterranean for him, erroneously supposing that Villeneuve intended to make for Egypt, Villeneuve passed through the Strait of Gibraltar, rendezvoused with the Spanish fleet, and sailed as planned for the Caribbean. Once Nelson realized that the French had crossed the Atlantic Ocean, he set off in pursuit. Cadiz. Villeneuve returned from the Caribbean to Europe, intending to break the blockade at Brest. But after two of his Spanish ships were captured during the Battle of Cape Finisterre by a squadron under Vice Admiral Sir Robert Calder, Villeneuve abandoned this plan and sailed back to Ferrol in northern Spain. There he received orders from Napoleon to return to Brest according to the main plan. Napoleon's invasion plans for Britain depended on having a sufficiently large number of ships of the line before Boulogne in France. This would require Villeneuve's force of 33 ships to join Vice Admiral Ganteaume's force of 21 ships at Brest, along with a squadron of 5 ships under Captain Allemande, which would have given him a combined force of 59 ships of the line. When Villeneuve set sail from Ferrol on the 10th of August, he was under orders from Napoleon to sail northward toward Brest. Instead, he worried that the British were observing his maneuvers. So on the 11th of August he sailed southward towards Cadiz on the southwestern coast of Spain. With no sign of Villeneuve's fleet by the 26th of August, the 3 French Army Corps invasion force near Boulogne broke camp and marched into Germany, where it was later engaged. The same month, Nelson returned home to Britain after 2 years of duty at sea. He remained ashore for 25 days, and was warmly received by his countrymen, who were nervous about a possible French invasion. Word reached Britain on the 2nd of September about the combined French and Spanish fleet in Cadiz harbour. Nelson had to wait until the 15th of September before his ship, HMS Victory, was ready to sail. On the 15th of August, Cornwallis decided to detach 20 ships of the line from the fleet guarding the English Channel and to have them sail southward to engage the enemy forces in Spain. This left the Channel drastically reduced of large vessels, with only 11 ships of the line present. This detached force formed the nucleus of the British fleet that would fight at Trafalgar. This fleet, under the command of Vice Admiral Calder, reached Cadiz on the 15th of September. Nelson joined the fleet on the 29th of September to take command. The British fleet used frigates to keep a constant watch on the harbour, while the main force remained out of sight 50 miles west of the shore. Nelson's hope was to lure the combined Franco-Spanish force out and engage it in a pell-mell battle. The force watching the harbour was led by Captain Blackwood, commanding HMS Euryalus. He was brought up to a strength of 7 ships on the 8th of October. Supply situation at this point, Nelson's fleet badly needed provisioning. On the 2nd of October, 5 ships of the line, HMS Queen, Canopus, Spencer, Zealous, Tigre, and the frigate HMS Endymion were dispatched to Gibraltar under Rear Admiral Sir Thomas Lewis for supplies. These ships were later diverted for convoy duty in the Mediterranean, although Nelson had expected them to return. Other British ships continued to arrive, and by the 15th of October the fleet was up to full strength for the battle. Nelson also lost Calder's flagship, the 98-gun Prince of Wales, which he sent home as Calder had been recalled by the Admiralty to face a court-martial for his apparent lack of aggression during the engagement off Cape Finisterre on the 22nd of July. Meanwhile, Villeneuve's fleet in Cadiz was also suffering from a serious supply shortage that could not be easily rectified by the impecunious French. Villeneuve's ships were also more than 2,000 men short of the force needed to sail. These were not the only problems faced by the Franco-Spanish fleet. The main French ships of the line had been kept in harbour for years by the British blockade with only brief sorties. The French crews included few experienced sailors, and, as most of the crew had to be taught the elements of seamanship on the few occasions when they got to sea, gunnery was neglected. The hasty voyage across the Atlantic and back used up vital supplies. Villeneuve's supply situation began to improve in October, but news of Nelson's arrival made Villeneuve reluctant to leave port. Indeed, his captains had held a vote on the matter and decided to stay in harbour. On the 16th of September, Napoleon gave orders for the French and Spanish ships at Cadiz to put to sea at the first favourable opportunity. join with 7 Spanish ships of the line then at Cartagena, go to Naples and land the soldiers they carried to reinforce his troops there, then fight decisively if they met a numerically inferior British fleet. The fleets British. On the 21st of October, Admiral Nelson had 27 ships of the line under his command. Nelson's flagship, HMS Victory, captained by Thomas Masterman Hardy, was one of 3 100-gun first-rates in his fleet. He also had 4 98-gun second-rates and 20 third-rates. One of the third-rates was an 80-gun vessel and 16 were 74-gun vessels. The remaining 3 were 64 gunships, which were being phased out of the Royal Navy at the time of the battle. Nelson also had 4 frigates of 38 or 36 guns, a 12-gun schooner and a 10-gun cutter. Franco-Spanish. Against Nelson, Vice Admiral Villeneuve fielded 33 ships of the line, including some of the largest in the world at the time. The Spanish contributed 4 first-rates to the fleet. 3 of these ships, one at 136 guns and 2 at 112 guns, were much larger than anything under Nelson's command. The 4th first-rate carried 100 guns. The fleet had 6 80-gun third-rates, and 1 Spanish 64-gun third-rate. The remaining 22 third-rates were 74-gun vessels, of which 14 were French and 8 Spanish. In total the Spanish contributed 15 ships of the line and the French 18. The fleet also included 5 40-gun frigates and 2 18-gun brigs, all French.